Good evening, everybody. It's been a very long day, and I hope I can wake you up a bit just for the end of the day. I'd like to, thank you so much to the organisers for inviting me and encouraging me to come to Athens. It really is an amazing place to be. So I'm going to I'll give you an update on what's happening in New Zealand first, and then I want to present some preliminary results from one of my studies on the barriers to stopping smoking for the 5% who are going to be left behind by the smoke-free goal. My disclosure statements: I have never received any funding from any tobacco or vaping company. I have no sort of financial interests in any. I've been in tobacco control for 31 years, and I left university where I was a professor of public health to establish my Centre of Research Excellence. And really the opportunity was for me to focus on Indigenous people worldwide. So the foundation made that possible, and I was given a grant from the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. My work is independent of them editorially. They do not decide what I research or look at any of my results or anything like that. In some ways, I have more independence than when I was in academia. So an overview, first an update on New Zealand and where we are at with the legislative and regulatory changes which have continued since I presented last year. Update on the smoking and vaping prevalence statistics, and then I'll move on to my preliminary results. So I had this graph last year, and I've just extended it a little bit. So in 2022, right on the end, we've had an amended, some regulations have come out. So the Vaping Regulation Act handed over control to the Ministry of Health to make further changes under regulation, rather than going to Parliament and amending the law every time they wanted to clamp down on sales of cigarettes or vaping. We've just had another new set of regulations come out to clamp down on vaping products, so I'll tell you a little bit more about those. So the 2023 crackdown on vaping, you're seeing this around the world, in the UK and the call in Australia. And so New Zealand the government's been lobbied very, very hard by anti-vaping lobby groups. The new regulation has stipulated that no new vape shops can be within 300 metres of a registered school or a marae. A marae is a traditional Māori meeting place. The anti-vaping groups have created a lot of panic. They've mainly targeted parents and school principals and teachers with a lot of the usual misinformation about vaping being dangerous and the many, many things we see on the social media claiming vaping. There's so many, I couldn't list any of them, but there are now parents against vaping groups that have been supported by the anti-vaping groups. And they've gone to the politicians. They're creating so much panic and scaremongering that the politicians have responded. They have banned single-use vapes, so these are disposables. There was some confusion, however, because some disposables are not all that disposable, if you know what I mean. So from 21st of December this year, and this was only recently announced, so from 21st of December, the single-use vape disposables will have a 20 milligram nicotine cap on the amount of nicotine. They must have a removable battery. They must have a child safety mechanism so that a child or young person can't pick it up and just vape. And there are new labelling requirements, which I'll explain further. So the retailers in New Zealand have a very short time to unload that stock. There was some small consultation or ability to, I think some selected groups were invited to submit on that previous one, but nowhere did it say they were going to clamp down on the reusable vapes. But when the regulation came out, this was in it. So from 21st of March next year, no vape devices or e-liquids or smokeless tobacco heat not burn packaging can have any cartoon or toy images on the packaging. And they can't have any non-permitted flavour descriptions. Reusable vapes must also meet this new product safety requirement, and they have put a cap on the nicotine salt level. So that will be 28.5 milligrams on nicotine salt. There was some confusion because under the vaping regulation, the law change, it capped it at 50 milligrams. But there's a difference between how much nicotine is in nicotine salt versus in nicotine freebase. And because it said 50 milligrams, we still had some nicotine salt that had a higher delivery mechanism for nicotine. The Ministry of Health have just been taken to court and lost the case on moving the cap to 28.5. That was because it was argued, you said 50 milligrams, and they were like, oh yeah, but we meant 28.5. And so they've lost that case, but they've changed the regulation anyway so that it will be 28.5 for nicotine salt. Reusables must also have a removable battery and a child safety mechanism where, you know, I don't know if you remember, the old devices used to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 before it would work. The problem is that pod systems in New Zealand are very popular now, and they have helped a lot of people who had not switched to vaping to move over because they're easier to use, they're newer, there's more innovation, and they deliver better than some of the older ones. And because of earlier concerns about the safety of batteries clinking around in people's pockets with coins and exploding or whatever, the pod systems generally now don't have a removable battery. So in New Zealand at the moment, the distributors are madly having a look at what will they still be able to sell in March. They're going to have to go to manufacturers in China and other countries and find pod systems that have a removable battery. They're an enclosed system now. So effectively, this is kind of a ban by stealth until the manufacturers find a vape product. You can still get the old box mods, but the pod systems have really taken over on it for daily use, out and about. In the previous law change, this was one of the radical policies that was introduced, and it was to close off access to cigarettes. So from 1 July next year, there will be no more than 600 retailers licensed to sell cigarettes throughout the whole country. Now, you all think New Zealand is a very small country. So what I have here, found this picture of New Zealand superimposed on Europe. Imagine that geographical area and only 600 retailers that can sell cigarettes. So New Zealand is reaching from way up Denmark, all down through Germany, Switzerland, all the way down past Monaco. That's a massive area, isn't it? Did you think New Zealand was small? Geographically, we only have 5 million people, but they're spread across. I mean, Auckland, the main biggest city, has 1 million, but there are people living across that whole area. There are people in rural areas, and the Ministry of Health have put out a handy, indicative map of where all these stores will be. So the gangs are like, thank you very much, because now we know where we can go and rob the tobacco products. I imagine there will be people lining up. People will have to drive much further to find cigarettes unless they live right nearby. So this is incredibly radical. And one thing that has not been taken into account in terms of policy, first, there's no evidence, there's no research, there's no trials backing the implementation of this policy. There has been no consideration of the unintended negative effects of this policy. Smoking among people living in rural areas is slightly higher than among people living in the cities, which is probably the same for your countries. This is also a very radical, untried, never been done anywhere policy. From 1 April 2025, all combustible tobacco cigarettes cannot have more than 0.08 milligrams per gram. This is the yield that you would get out of it if you smoke. It's barely nothing. It's below what they call the functional level. It's sub-functional. So it's like you can have a car, but you can't have an engine. You can sit in the car and you can play with it, but you're not going to go anywhere. So this has never been tried. It's not been implemented anywhere. And again, the unintended negative effects have not been considered. I'm particularly concerned, and I will show you the prevalence statistics next, for the people who will be left behind. So New Zealand's smoke-free goal is 5% or below by 2025. This will take it to 0. The other one, which is the one that has gained the most international coverage and focus, is the, technically, the policies call a sinking lid. You've been hearing of it as the generation ban. So from 1 January 2027, the legal age of purchasing cigarettes will go up from R18 to R19 every year. R20, R21, R22, every year it will go up by 1 year. Now I see the UK are thinking of doing this, and some Asian countries are thinking of doing this. So, right, let's have a look at prevalence and where we are at in New Zealand with reaching smoke-free 2025. So last year I showed you this up until 2020-21. Now this graph has 21-22 figures, and it really is, fabulous. The light blue line on the top is regular, at least monthly smoking. So always there's about a 2% difference between regular and daily. Daily's the important one. Those people, have a dependency and smoke every day. However, in New Zealand, the regular is also important because people on low incomes sometimes can't afford to smoke every day. So I haven't got my notes there, the 2% difference. So the regular is about 10%, and then the brown line, which is daily, 8%. We're at 8% daily smoking. So that really is fabulous. And for me, having worked to reduce Māori, the Indigenous people's smoking rates, which has always been disproportionately high, and Māori women for the last 50 years have always had a higher smoking rate than Māori men. we have finally dropped below Māori men with this statistic. I'm not showing you that graph. I have another one to show you. Now, let's look at vaping. So total monthly vaping, and monthly is not daily. This is people who might, I was out and, had a puff of somebody's vape, or, somebody experimented. That, at least monthly is 10%. The orange line, this is daily vaping, and that is 8%. So this is cross-sectional. It doesn't say this is causal data. The other limitation is that it doesn't take into account how many people are smoking and vaping. Nevertheless, you can see this nice kind of relationship occurring there. And then, as you've seen earlier today, and if you look across all the nations that have experienced a rapid drop in smoking prevalence because of the introduction of either the heat not burn or vaping or snus, you see the same picture. Now, I do have some concern. I mean, my concern has always been the people with the highest smoking rates, people with mental health conditions, and Indigenous and those on lowest income. So I did want to show you this graph of how the disparity across society is occurring. So this is it should be 21-22 data. It looks like I have 2021 data. The highest income 40% of New Zealand are already smoke-free. They're already at 5%. The lowest income, 40% on the lowest income, they are being left behind here. And if you think, some of them are in rural areas, some of them have schizophrenia and other mental health conditions highly correlated with high smoking rates. Indigenous and Pacific Island people in this 4th and 5th quintile of New Zealand, they're not going to make 2025. And then they're on lowest income, and then they're going to have to drive further to find a shop that sells cigarettes. For whatever reason, then they're not switching. I mean, we actually have higher switch rates among Māori women, for instance. So there is good switching among those groups, but they were left behind to begin with. They are going to be the most affected by the radical reduction in number of stores, and what was the other one? The denicotinization. So now just to move to my study, Voices of the 5%. So this is a longitudinal qualitative research project. Many people have presented results from surveys. A qualitative study is where we can hear what people say themselves without forcing them into a yes, no, or agree, disagree type of response, or a drop-down menu of responses pre-chosen by the researcher. So I'm really wanting to understand what is going on for this group. They didn't want to stop smoking, or they didn't believe they would be able to stop smoking by 2025. We're following them, and we've been following them since 2020, and we're hoping to follow them through, well, at least to 2024. We recruited 62 people. They're very diverse, ranging in age from 19 to 81, from all across New Zealand. And for this analysis, I've extracted from the transcripts of 50 participants who talked about nicotine, like what is it, what does it do, and what harm does it cause, and how. So we're using this data to look at barriers to quitting and switching. And I was kind of surprised by this. And it goes with some of the previous results that have been presented throughout the day. So 35 of the 50 didn't know or were unsure, or they rejected messages that they had heard about what nicotine is, whether it causes harm, and how it causes harm. Some said, like, it's a plant, isn't it? Is it an additive? It's like tar, or it has tar in it. They're talking about nicotine. It's a narcotic, it's a stimulant. Some statements you'll see are close to true, and some are completely not true, not factual. So looking at what they know about nicotine, 29 of the 50 believe that nicotine was an additive, that it was added into cigarettes. They do believe it's addictive. So this is not necessarily untrue. It is dependency forming. So they say it's an addictive drug. This person said on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being crack, cocaine, heroin, etc., and 1 is coffee, then they'd put it maybe 2 or 3. Another person said it's probably one of the most addictive drugs, but it also, this is interesting, it also leaves your body quickly. So they didn't believe that it was a factor in keeping people smoking. For them, it's not the drug that keeps me smoking, they said. It's the habitual side of it. And then another person said, if I don't have a cigarette for 3 or 4 hours, I feel like killing somebody. I know it's very addictive. So many of them knew that it was dependency forming. But what are the harms of nicotine? A few people said little more than it just doesn't do any good. It's bad. They couldn't say any more than that. Little was said about any diseases that nicotine causes. And a few people said little more than it can be fatal, makes your heart race a little. Something like nicotine damages the small blood vessels in your body and can cause pneumonia. And another said that's a substance that does damage to the lungs. So this is what they know about nicotine. And as I said before, some of these are near factual and some are not. But how does nicotine cause disease? Well, 10 people commented on how nicotine causes disease. One said, well, the plant, it's a deadly nightshade and that's poisonous, so that's poisonous. Another said, it gums up your lungs, it makes my lungs black, it produces tar that goes onto your lungs, whereas we know that is the smoke that does that, not the nicotine. Some said, this is a saying in New Zealand, bugger all. Bugger all, they don't know anything. So several said they don't know anything about nicotine. They'd never had it explained to them, and they knew very little about it. In a country that for 50 years has had a comprehensive tobacco control program, many anti-smoking campaigns, many health education campaigns, how are we in this position where we have a small group who say they know bugger all? A few knew some basics, such as it's an addictive drug, and another person said it definitely causes chemical changes in your body. I don't understand why or how exactly, I just know that I feel better without it in my system. I know it's a stimulant, but other than that, not too much about it. There were some people who rejected the information they were hearing about nicotine, or they didn't think it applied to them. For example, someone said, I've got nothing on my fingers, no nicotine. They were referring to the yellowing. I know about the nicotine, but I don't draw back. So they were thinking because they don't inhale the smoke down into their lungs, then it wasn't going to affect them. And then there were some that didn't believe nicotine was as harmful as claimed. It does less damage than alcohol. When you look at the composition of cigarettes or tobacco, the way they're made up, this person said there's stuff or nicotine in them. And another said, some people can't take it, and other people, it doesn't bother them. So these are kind of rationales that people say to themselves, but generally this result is showing some people are rejecting the information that may be out there or that they're hearing. And a few did say that the claims re-nicotine were just misinformation. So I don't need to read this all, but it's only one of the poisons in the thing. It's not just nicotine we're getting from cigarettes that makes people addicted. The nicotine's just one of the poisons. And about the people who put the information about nicotine being bad out there, they say it out of ignorance because they hate smoking. They've just blurted out a whole bunch of crap. It's actually the personal hate of nicotine, not the nicotine itself, that's bad. If you started paying someone their weekly wage to anti-message smoking, it doesn't matter if you're anti-smoking, you're going to say it's bad. So I thought that was interesting that these are just people out in New Zealand, and some of them have this opinion. Another person was, it just seems completely absurd that you can isolate 1 out of 7,000 and say that's the reason that you can't control your smoking. I mean, to me, it's a completely disempowering message. I think it's a very, very minimal influential factor on people's ability to control their smoking or not. So yeah, I'm very cynical about it. Some participants said they avoid listening to the messages about nicotine. This person said, I'm an active smoker, so why would I want to look into it, The pictures are sort of hard enough to look at sometime, but no, as for going deeper, no. So we have people who are actively shutting down. They're not going to listen to the messages. So in conclusion, I'm running on time, I hope. In conclusion, and I thought, we say all the time, everybody knows smoking kills, so why don't they switch? Why don't they quit? But some people don't know. Some people don't understand how smoking kills. And this can lead to cynicism and rejection of health risk messages. So, echoing, I think, your message earlier today, don't forget the basics of health education. We think that because we've been telling everyone for 50 years that smoking kills, they all understand, they all know. Some people don't, and they're going to be left behind if we don't make an effort to explain to them honestly and give them the facts how it does do harm, what is doing harm. Thank you.